It's time for the Tactics Meeting, the program where we talk to subject matter experts about response tactics and technology. And today we have a special treat. The Tactics Meeting podcast partnered with Crowley Maritime and our good friend Mark Curtis to put together a panel on LNG safety. We have a great panel of experts, and I hope you enjoy it, so stick around. Today's episode of the Tactics Meeting podcast is brought to you by my good friends at Portage Bay Solutions. I've been working with them on their Easy 213 resource ordering application for well over a year now, and we use it for every event, every tabletop exercise that we go to. It solves that resource ordering dilemma of how to route the 213RR, how to do approvals. It just solves all of those problems. So if you're interested, and I think you should be, you can reach out to info@portagebaysolutions.com or contact me at podcast@thetacticsmeeting.online. And I thank Portage Bay for their support of the podcast.
Our goal today is really to learn from each other. These four people that are on the panel are industry experts. They either are part of the LNG creation, shipping, or response communities and have a lot to share with you. As many of you are with Crowley, you know that we're gearing up for a February drill with our partners in safety over at Shell. And we want to make sure that everybody understands the risks and the safeguards that we've already put in place as an organization. We've been working with LNG for years. In 2018, our facility here in Jacksonville opened up and we filled our first ISO container. We also launched the Koki and Taino, the two Conroes that are powered by LNG, but we're building this very special LNG barge right now, which will launch shortly. And that's why we're going to be doing this drill in a couple of weeks. So as part of that, we asked, hey, you industry folks, can you help us? Can you help us learn a little bit more? Can you teach us a little bit more about LNG, its properties, and what's going on? So I reached out and bullied some of my good friends to see if you would come be panelists and a host as part of this. So I'm going to kick off by not saying any more than please welcome your host for today, Captain Dan Smiley, who I work with very closely over at the Washington State Maritime Co-op, who's also done a lot of work with Gallagher Marine Services. He's the response manager that pretty much answers every single call when I have an issue. So thank you guys for agreeing to do this. And I'm looking forward to participating as well and listening to all of you talk about this very important topic. So, Captain Smiley, I turn it over to you, sir.
Thank you, Mark, or where you stole that picture from. It's good to see everybody. Kuldeep, nice to see you. It's been a little while. Jim, I just left you in Anchorage. Are you still in Anchorage? You're still, yeah, you guys. The four of you can turn your microphones on for this. This is great. We'll go around the table. It's nice of Mark to reach out and ask me to host this. I did a bunch of research on LNG as I was getting ready for it, and from my performance in the Kahoot, apparently I didn't do enough research. So I'm glad to see all of you are going to tell me what's going on. We'll go around the room to introduce you. There's a couple of last names I'm not even going to try, so I won't embarrass myself. So I'll just use first names, and we'll start with the upper left-hand corner of my screen. Kuldeep, can you introduce yourself? You're on mute. It's the phrase of the decade, right? You're on mute.
Right. Can you hear me now?
I can.
Right, Dan, nice to see you again. We had a pretty wild time in a Christmas party not long ago, Dan and I and several others. But anyway, that's for another time. So I know Jim in this panelist group, and I do not know the other two. My name is Kuldeep Singh, and I'm with Gallagher Marine Systems. I've been with GMS since 2004. So it's been a while, almost, in fact, 20 years and a few days now. Prior to that, I was at the American Eagle Tankers. And prior to that, I sailed. I started my sailing career in 1974. I sailed for a little over a decade as a shipmaster on large tankers. I know the U.S. scenario for a long period of time. I've been in the U.S. for several decades. And that's my brief background. And up to you, Dan. Thanks.
Thank you. Thanks, Kuldeep. Jim.
Hi, everyone. I'm Jim Elliott. I'm the Chief Operating Officer of the Teichmann Group of companies, which includes T&T Salvage. So we're Crowley's salvage and marine firefighting service provider. My background is I did 26 years in the U.S. Coast Guard and focused most of my career on marine casualty response, strike team operations, and marine safety. And I've been with T&T for now over 12 years, and I'm currently in Alaska responding to a lithium battery fire. So thanks for letting me be here. Appreciate it.
Yeah. And I just left Jim up there not that long ago, where I was the planning section chief on that fire. I look forward to hearing how that's going here, maybe after this is over. Rami, welcome.
Thank you. Yep, I'm Rami Abusoufeh. I'm a mechanical engineer, currently leading the LNG infrastructure team for Crowley as the, from the customer facility end. Been working with natural gas since my early career. I started with Schmack Bioenergy for biogas digesting for natural gas liquefaction. Then I moved on to ABR, which used to be GE previously, led the engineering from the natural gas for power generation, and now I'm at Crowley.
Great, welcome. I look forward to hearing what you have to say about LNG. And Christopher.
Yeah, good day, Dan. Christopher Deschenes. I'm a fleet director with Crowley Global Ship Management. Been with Crowley for 6 years, and my primary responsibilities was operational management of the 2 Conroe vessels upon delivery at the shipyard. It's a position I still maintain today. And prior to these 2 vessels, I've been in the marine industry, various management and project engineer positions. Did a little bit of sailing time early on in my career, but happy to be here and participate. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Christopher. Yeah, I know LNG is becoming a more popular fuel for main propulsion. 2 ships up here in my neck of the woods in the Puget Sound area, the 2 tote ships that run between Tacoma, Washington, and Anchorage were repowered over the last 2 years running LNG. And so you've got 2 ships, and maybe Kuldeep can tell us how prevalent this kind of switch to LNG for main propulsion is. Kuldeep, is this a big trend?
So Dan, there were some regulations that came out several years ago. They're called 2 target dates that IMO set, the 2030 target dates and the 2050 target dates, reduction of greenhouse gases and particulate matter, et cetera, et cetera. These are very ambitious targets, and actually the US targets are a little more ambitious than the IMO target across the board. So that caused a paradigm shift in the thinking process of what fuels are going to be used. This is a long process. It'll run into 2050 and beyond. From now on till the near future, which is several decades, the thing that is going to govern shipping is what comes out of the funnel. And because of that, LNG is an interim fuel, and I say that interim fuel, and we'll look at some more of its characteristics and why it makes it. It's a very good combustive fuel. In other words, it burns really well. It doesn't leave any residues, and that's why it's being used as an alternative fuel for the reduction of greenhouse gases.
All right, thanks. Well, we're going to jump in with Rami first to talk about what is LNG. I mean, it's mostly methane, which made me wonder what, and you're cleaning it up. I mean, why don't we just call it methane? Why do we call it LNG in the first place? Rami?
Yeah, so it's in reality, it's a fossil fuel that's been extracted, and with the process of removing heavy hydrocarbonate like ethylene, propene, butene, benzene, they get it so clean that it turns into almost a higher percentage of methane, let's say in the 90s or 88 or 95 or 98. Once it's injected to a pipeline, or it's taken into a process of cooling that natural gas into a certain level of negative 260 degrees Fahrenheit, which basically turn it into liquid. Not only reducing the footprint of the gas for easier transportation or usage, but it creates easier access to the end user, right? It's not as flammable as it is when it's methane, when it's liquid. In reality, it does require certain process for storage than a pipeline. It requires these isolated tanks or keeping it cool, but it's a great use for odorless, colorless, non-toxic fuel.
In order to get it into its liquid form, I mean, a gas like ammonia or propane or butane, we would just apply pressure, right, until it became a liquid. But that doesn't work with natural gas,
Not with
right?
LNG. Nope, not with natural gas. You will require to do, there's a cool box. You can do it with a pressure swing, but there's a certain process that have to be completed in order to turn it into liquid, and mainly it have to be refrigerated. It's not a pressure cask.
So once it's in its container for shipping or storage, once we've cooled it down to negative 260 degrees, do I need to continue to apply a refrigerant to keep it cold, or will the insulation in those storage tanks keep it at its cryogenic temperature?
So yes, the insulation for a specific tanks, for example, the Crowley ISOs, the Crowley permanent, the smaller facility that we built for the end user, these are double insulated tanks with a vacuum. Sometimes the customer have bore lights and vacuum, which basically keep the liquid in a liquid phase for 100 or 120 days.
So after that, as we approach the end of that 100 or 120 day period, do I have to apply refrigerant, or what do I do with it after that if I need to keep it as a liquid?
You will have to apply a cooling system or a refrigerant system to these tanks, correct? Generally, when it's 120 days or 100 day comes, it is not just like poof, it's all gas now. It start vaporizing little by little, where you feel the pressure relief valve is venting. That's when you notice that, Mr. Customer or the end user, you have to start consuming some of that fuel, or we're gonna have to take it back to a liquefier and send it back to them where we get a newer gas. In a different process, some facilities where they know they're not going to be consuming that fuel for the next 300-400 days, a cooling system is required for such a design.
Okay, great.
May I add, Dan? Typically, in a liquid state, it's kept in equilibrium. In other words, the pressure is maintained in such a fashion. That's why, as Rami said, once in a while you've got to add refrigerant to cool it down to keep it in a balanced state between pressure and liquid, between gas and liquid.
Great, thank you. Let's jump over to Jim. Talk about the hazards of LNG. Jim, I'm going to call you when there's a problem. Jim is the Swiss Army knife of fixing problems. So I've got my LNG, and for whatever reason, it's not in the container the way it's supposed to be. What do I have to worry about?
Well, first off, I think overall the LNG industry has been very safe. So there haven't been that many responses from an emergency perspective. But I see you got my slides up here, so we can just kind of walk through the discussion if you like. Just background on T&T. I'll just talk about some capabilities, and then we'll talk about the some hazards, risks, and response. And I always like to talk about how we work together to respond as a team. But background on T&T, real quick. We've been around since 1957. well over 60 years of experience, and we are a certified, recognized salvage marine firefighting service provider by the Coast Guard, which means we meet all these requirements to respond. And I'll show you the regulations in just a few minutes. But we have some experienced salvage masters and mooring masters experienced in LNG, and all of our team have been trained in LNG firefighting and have gone through ABS courses in LNG safety. So we try to bring together the best team anytime there's an incident. When you think about the hazards involved, like I said, I mean, there hasn't been a significant case history on LNG incidents, but it's as we mentioned, it's cryogenic liquid, minus 260 degrees. So it's going to be, from a cryogenic perspective, a danger potentially to personnel and even structural hazards, because it can create brittle steel or issues with the structure of the vessel itself if it's released. There's because it's going into from the liquefied to gaseous state, there's a vapor dispersion. So you want to think about that and how you can prevent ignition sources, because there can be a remote flash fire. As I mentioned during the game at the beginning, it can be an asphyxiation hazard. So responders need SCBAs and proper PPE. And if it's confined, it can be an explosive hazard if that release is vaporization is in a confined space. Similar to Dan, you mentioned we've been working on this lithium battery issue. It produces hydrogen gas, right? And if it's in confined space, it can be an explosive hazard. So those are the concerns from the safety perspective. I was preparing for this. I was thinking about the things, looking at what we would need to do to respond and how we would think about that. So, this is a pretty short discussion, but a lot of work has gone into it, looking at different best practices from classification societies and industry work groups like the International Chamber of Shipping, Society for Gases and Marine Fuel. They have a whole guide on salvage responses, for example, for LNG incidents. So some quick hitters. You're going to stay upwind of the incident, establish a safety zone until you can get a good risk assessment. Whenever we respond to a fire and incident, we're bringing air monitoring equipment, thermal imaging equipment to characterize the extent of the incident. For fire extinguishing agents, typically dry chemical is the best. My understanding, I've been to a couple of LNG firefighting schools, but there's other ways to handle it. Water, you don't want to direct water onto the fire. You can use it as a cooling agent. If you want to go to the next slide, it'll show you some considerations there. So again, not recommended direct water at the source of the leak or pooled LNG, because it's going to cause icing and failure of valves and instruments, but you can use it to do boundary cooling. And then for PPE, whenever we would respond, we want to have atmospheric monitoring, infrared, standard PPE, and then proper gloves, flame retardant clothing, and again, self-contained breathing apparatus. So we step back, that's the tactical side of it. When we step back from like a strategic picture, I always like to, these are my favorite quotes from the National Contingency Plan. That's what I carry in my back pocket, is that, safety of life is always number one. So we would work with the ship's crew, local responders, first responders, and work within a unified command. But bottom line is, any type of emergency response or salvage operation is, it's time critical, especially with an LNG release. And our goal is to stabilize the situation from getting worse and start defensive actions as soon as possible. I know that we're going to talk about this a little bit more, about how we all work together. And I'm on a response right now in Alaska, and this is, we have a qualified individual of the incident management team and salvers and OSRAs. We all work together to meet the requirements of the best response plan. And And if you think about just salvage and marine firefighting, if you look at the next couple of slides, and I won't go into this in detail, but there's you want to do a remote assessment, you want to do a assessment immediately, and then start looking at the structural stability considerations of the vessel and all the different services that may be needed to handle the situation. So, we respond to marine casualties every day, and it typically includes, from this list of services, we try to do the best we can to get that equipment there and resolve the issue. Firefighting, is marine firefighting can be very complex. It's a kind of a niche specialty in the maritime industry, and there was just recently 2 firefighters that lost their life in Newark on a roll-on, roll-off vessel. It kind of highlighted the training and experience, I guess, of municipal firefighters that are trained to always go into harm's way, and we try to work with local firefighters. I know Crowley has done the same to prepare and make sure that we're all aligned on how we would respond to ensure the safety of life. And then, this is just an example of a remote assessment form, but we want to make sure that we're working with the Coast Guard and state and everybody to make sure we have all the information correct. We're all aligned as we move forward. So I know on every vessel they have a similar form. This Coast Guard Salvage Engineering Response Team, we're aligned with them to develop the expectation would be that you develop a plan as soon as possible to resolve the issue. So when it comes to LNG response operations, thinking about the hazards and the overall response structure, we continue to work with industry work groups to refine the state of the art when it comes to response. Again, LNG marine firefighting is a standard for all of our personnel, and continually doing training and exercises in addition to real-time operations. So, for example, in Galveston, that's where a lot of our team is based. In Texas, they're doing weekly bunkering operations for LNG to a cruise ship. So we have hands-on training experience doing that, and working with the industry to do as we're getting ready to do with everyone, to do an exercise to make sure we're all aligned and we can all work together. So
Great.
thanks, Dan.
Jim.
Thanks for allowing me to kind of walk through that. Appreciate it.
Well, that's great. And for those of you who want to talk more about shipboard fires, Jim did sit on a panel that we did at the Tactics Conference, which was released as a podcast. We had Jim, we had Todd Duke from Resolve. We've had two ship fires in the Puget Sound in the last two years that resulted in conflicts with municipal firefighters. Jim mentioned the tragedy that took place in Newark, where 2 firefighters died in that car carrier fire. We had the car carrier fire in Jacksonville, where 9 firefighters were injured. When it comes to marine firefighting and working with municipal firefighters, it really is a big concern of mine, as I think it should be for all of us. So I recommend that. Next, I want to jump over to Chris. Jim talked about the bunkering that's going on in Texas all the time, but you're engaged in bunkering as well as having 2 ships that are propelled by LNG. What are the safeguards and concerns that you're working with as you move towards doing that bunkering?
Well, Crowley took a different approach with bunkering of the 2 LNG fueled vessels. And urban legend at Crowley is that the development of the Conroe vessel and the LNG bunkering and operation was developed on the back of a napkin by two gentlemen here at Crowley. And then quite a few years later, is boom, we have delivery of the vessels. I recall prior to the delivery of the first vessel, being in Jacksonville at our terminal, where we had partnered with our LNG supplier to build a fixed bunkering facility within our terminal. And so that helped us out with something that was a safe and repeatable operation. And as of today, we've had 158 LNG bunkering evolutions, transmitting about 144,000 metric tons of LNG with very little incidents. There was some growing pains at the very beginning, as ourselves in the shoreside facility, which was operated by our partner, as we kind of fine-tuned and developed the LNG bunkering process. So today we have a working model. It works very well. It allows us to conduct cargo operations while we bunker. There is a little bit of restrictions that are put in place for cargo bays directly before and after the LNG bunkering connections. But it's proven to be a safe and repeatable operation. And our LNG supplier, they've actually used that facility to begin bunkering other LNG fueled vessels when our two Conroe vessels are not at the terminal. So it's worked out really well. There is always the concerns of complacency of a kind of an event that you do so frequently. So we make sure that the crews are staying alert. All of the safety devices are in working operation. There's the pre-bunkering conference. And then if there is any issues or challenges that might rise up during the event, both facilities, the ship and the shoreside facility, have a stop work authority to halt the bunkering operation, evaluate what's happening, communicate, and then address the issue, and then begin bunkering again. And it's worked out very well.
And you're building a bunkering barge, is that correct?
Yep, we are building a bunkering barge. It's for a third party customer, and it won't be used to bunker these two vessels. But perhaps in the future, we may outgrow that land-based facility. It does take up some valuable acreage within our terminal. We may decide that we need that for containers, and perhaps we do go with an LNG bunker barge operation if we decide to.
And so, Rami, when you were talking about transportation and distribution, what kinds of concerns are you trying to address? And you're on mute.
We don't have that much of a concern from the actual, logistics perspective. It's just a general risk of over-the-road trailers, over-the-road incidents. Possibly can be a port operation incidents or concerns. But overall, we kind of address it in a very safely manner, especially with the procedure and steps that we take in delivering these containers to customers' end.
Are the dangers significantly different from other gases stored as liquids? For instance, propane, butane, ammonia?
I would say it might be pretty similar. At least I'm going to compare it to propane. The risk for it might be less, especially since we're not concerned about if an incident happened with an ISO tank over the road on the highway. We're not concerned about the gas going down into the sewage system or the ground. We more focused on contaminating the area where allowed the gas to go up to atmosphere. So from a risk, you can look at it in both perspectives. it might be the same risk, but it's less risky to deal with LNG than other fuels.
Okay. So primarily methane. So LNG as a gas has a relative gas density of roughly 0.6. Is that about right?
Approximately.
Yeah, approximately 0.6, so it's lighter than air. But when it's first released, it's really cold, right? So it is going to stay near the ground in that first area because it's so cold before it's going to have to warm up before it rises in the atmosphere. Correct?
Yeah, the flash point or the vaporizing rate for it, it's pretty significant. Now, if we're talking about being close to the ground, if we're talking about a faucet that just opened, then most likely it's going to be vaporized as soon as it hit the atmosphere, right? But if we're talking about a larger lump sum of, let's say, a whole ISO ripped into half and the liquid came out, yes, we foresee it to sit in the, as a puddle in the floor till it start vaporizing more and more. Correct.
Okay. Well, let's jump over to Kuldeep, who is going to talk to us about responding to these LNG related incidents, and that may lead to a conversation back and forth with Jim. Kuldeep, go ahead, take it away.
Hey, Dan, you're probably aware that I've got a set of slides too. Can I share my screen?
Yeah, by all means.
Oh, yeah, here you have it. These are a lot of slides, and we've discussed, there are 42 slides and all. I'm not going to go through all of those, but I'll quickly go through. Whoever's controlling these slides, I think we all know what is LNG. The important part is it is reduced to 1 to 600 times its original volume in its gaseous state. And there, if you've got to fight a war, you got to know your enemy. And if the enemy is LNG, you've got to know the characteristics of this gas very, very well. As Rami said, it's mainly methane. Various fields all over the world have got different compositions of natural LNG or natural gas. And then the liquefaction makes a liquid. It's compressed and at the same time refrigerated through a compression process. So you have it in liquid form, and it becomes easier to transport lesser volumes in liquid form as compared to the actual gas. So let's go on to the next slide, please. Will an LNG spill pollute the ground or waterways? This is the question that probably comes to your mind. LNG will not pollute any natural resource such as groundwater, waterways, wetlands, streams, or beaches. And the reason is, as Rami touched upon, the transition from liquid to gaseous state is very rapid. And in a liquid state, it's heavier than air. And actually also in a gaseous state, it's heavier than air. But its evolution rate is so quick and it spreads, it becomes lighter than air and dissipates very, very quickly. So when it comes to a spill, this is fairly forgiving. But the problem with a spill, LNG spill, may not be the environmental impact of that spill. The catastrophic release of LNG can be very devastating. It is very readily catches fire, but there have to be conditions for those fire to happen. It will generally not catch fire unless these three conditions are met. It should vaporize. In fact, all fires are the vapor of that substance which actually catches fire. It must be the flammable range is between 5% to 15%, which is very similar to the crude oil. If it's less than 5% by volume, it is too lean. If it's more than 15% by volume, it's too rich to catch fire. So it's got to be in that range, the correct mixture between air and that gas. The ignition source must be present in the gaseous mixture with air. Only if these three conditions are met will LNG catch fire. Now, does it explode? Yes, it does. Can I go to the next slide? So there are hazards. It's not as innocuous as it looks like. In confined spaces, there can be an explosion. The LNG vapors burn at very high temperatures, and actually, it is almost the melting point of steel. And it's contained in steel. So structural damage from a fire can be there. And then, of course, you've got the human element, as Steve said, Jim said that you've got to take the human part of it first. So it can cause extremely deep burns. because it's cryogenic in nature. And actually, I've been to locations which mean minus 30, minus 50 degrees Fahrenheit. If you touch steel for a couple of split second with a bare hand, you're going to lose skin. And this is far colder than that. It's an asphyxiant. We talked about it. It has severe flammability hazard. The hazards do not stop here. High concentration of LNG vapor may disperse oxygen, asphyxia. LNG and its vapors do not exhibit the characteristic odor. So you really cannot smell it, unlike, so the release has to have very good detection systems. The containers of LNG are typically under pressure and temperature controlled conditions. These conditions, the containers may explode if heated or if temperature control is not maintained. Next slide. The other thing you got to look at is the speed of propagation of flame of LNG. It may not sound a lot. It is generally less than 10 meters per second, but it's definitely a lot faster than a man can run. You know, and it can reach up to more than 100 meters per second, which really means is if there is a release of LNG and there is a flame introduction and the conditions are right, it does catch fire, a flash fire, it's going to travel rapidly. So that is why you require large safety zones when it comes to release of LNGs. It's fairly rapid, not as rapid as some other gases in terms of its propagation, but it can detonate, and in confined spaces, it can be very, very dangerous. Next slide. You can see this is a fracture, or steel fracture from cryogenic conditions. So it can lead to several other issues related to just the cryogenic nature of its carriage. Next. So what do you do if there's an LNG leak? It's not explosive really, but it's got a very high, it's actually very high in the classification of fires. It will vaporize quickly. Studies have been conducted to demonstrate that LNG vapors rise rapidly and dissipate in the wind. Now, this is the actually the saving grace of this gas, is that it dissipates so quickly. Next slide. So from spill response, this is probably a very forgiving stuff to release. Detection is the first part. That is why some of the most sophisticated equipment, most sophisticated vessels and ships are gas ships, and for a reason too. They've got very advanced detection systems. They've got fixed detection systems, portable detection systems. So first is to detect, since it vaporizes so quickly, the detection part is an important part. And then we get into response, which is notification, including the QI as per non-tank VRP. The non-tank VRP was not designed for LNG gas. It was designed for the fuel, hydrocarbon fuel within the LNG ships. They call non-tank vessels. But now, since it's an incident and the whole concept has changed, QI notification is there, and of course, salvers and the others. Then we get into the assessing phase. The assessing phase is an important part of actually checking your risks. Evacuate people, non-essential people, that's an important aspect because of asphyxia and because of the cold conditions and because of the possibility of very high temperature fires. Then as Rami said, isolate. Now, you may or may not be aware that terminals actually design, if they've got one LNG storage tank, the containment around that tank is at least the same volume as the liquid in that tank. The point being that it can contain, and then you got vertical dispersion taking place, which lesser chance of a problem and fire spreading, etc. Isolate is another aspect. And of course, monitor, as Jim said. Air monitoring is an important aspect. How far is it reached? Where is it? Do you need to evacuate more people? We've evacuated entire townships at times, or at least partial townships in a release of crude oil. Secure, review, and then debrief. The debriefing part is the continuous improvement process of any response. So these are the basic response tactics. Next slide. Why do you need to evacuate area residents? This question may come up to your mind because it dissipates so quickly. The decision to actually evacuate is based on only one principle, is safety of the public. You don't want even that iota of possibility of human loss or human damage or life loss or damage. So that's why evacuation is an important part that you need to look at. Next slide. I think Jim's touched upon this. I will not. But the important part here is, why is water not appropriate as an extinguishing media? As water can increase the volatility of the LNG and cause ice formation and crystallization. When ice is formed, the volume actually increases. So you can have structural damage from that, etc. And water will then assimilate to become part of the runoff, and it may can cause explosion hazard in confined spaces where the water runs off. The hazards of combustion produce smoke, CO2, carbon monoxide, and other products, and also nitrics, the oxides of nitrogen. Next.
But one
From
comment.
a spill response, sorry.
One comment, Kuldeep, and that's more for Daniel. So if you go back to the previous slide about water, think about it as dry ice, and it just vaporizing. And the more you put water, basically you're creating that more of that fume coming out, or the gas coming out, which makes it actually riskier than it is before, because now you're creating a larger sum of gas that's going up in the air rather than small venting or small boiling. So you're actually helping it to vaporize faster, which basically create that bigger cloud for you.
So you're absolutely right, Rami. And I tell you from our personal experience, we attend several hundred ships on an annual basis. Several of them are LNG vessels. One of the requirements of LNG vessels is to have a water curtain. And if you ask the ship's crew, even though they're highly trained, if you ask the ship's crew, what is their water curtain for? Most will tell you it's firefighting, or several will tell you it's firefighting, which is not really true. It's actually for cooling in the case of the release and there's a fire. Next slide. So do you need to exercise and drill? And this is part of what you're doing. The tactics part is what Crowley is trying to achieve. Just like OPA 90 drills and exercises required, the Coast Guard has actually put it down in the FAQs on their website. So you should do tabletop exercises, refueling procedure exercises, response to potential contingencies, these kind of exercises and drills. And it's recommended to be done every quarter. So if you're going to operate bunker supply vessels that are LNG, or actually operate LNG vessels, these drills are recommended to be done. Next.
So Kuldeep, but this is not an Open 90 regulated product, right?
So it's not. That is why the Coast Guard, the Center of Excellence for Gas, Coast Guard Center of Excellence for Gas, has addressed it very astutely. They have actually talked about a recommendation to do these drills. So you're right. It's not an OPA 90 regulated, component part of it, but they have really addressed it correctly. And these drills are actually, the idea of a drill is to relive an incident on a daily basis. In other words, an incident is an immovable event. It transpires. There's nothing you can do about it. The idea of doing drills is to improve and superimpose your activity in drills so that you're actually behaving the same way as an actual incident would. So drills are a very important component of response. Next. So as I said, these are the most advanced vessels. They will be the most advanced vessels because of the nature of the cargo, the cryogenic part, the way it's carried, the propensity to actually have really high temperature fires and that can spread fairly quickly. So IMO in the IGF code has actually come up with very strict requirements for construction. I will not get into it. From a bunkering standpoint, there's a very advanced bunkering station on these vessels. There is detection systems are there. There are double door requirements to prevent the gas from coming out, et cetera, et cetera. But let's go on to the next one. There's enhanced fire safety. Electrical insulation is a very important part. It actually redefined EX equipment on board vessels. So the next. There are several ways to bunker LNG. You've got vessel to vessel, you've got truck to vessel, you've got tank terminal tank to vessel, and you've also got the portable tank being placed on board and replaced, and the empty tank being taken away. So we are really dealing from the Crowley perspective. We are dealing with number 3, vessel to vessel transfer. Next. The bunkering processes are, Jim touched upon it, and I think Chris touched upon it. The guy, as we'll see later down in the slides. Maybe the next slide, please. And the next. And the next. So that's crew safety. These are special equipment to be used, including gloves, etc. Jim touched upon it. Next. So this is a great resource of information. The Liquefied Gas Carrier National Center of Expertise, I've just shown you some of their the documents that they have and some of the advice and field notices, job aids, etc. that they have. They've got a job aid called Ship to Ship LNG Bunkering Job Aid. Next. Training is a very important aspect of it. Actually, in May of 2014, there was a release in that really changed the concept during bunkering. There was a release. They really changed the concept of training for LNG and bunkering. Now it's very evolved. The SSW is actually slow to take off, but now we've got clear guidelines of what requires to be trained. We do audits in shipping companies that are actually operating vessels that use LNG as a fuel. Some of them are very advanced training processes they have, and some have got the bare minimum. That all depends on your work process and what you're delivering. But training is a very important aspect. The other important part of training in the LNG sphere, the LNG field, one has to be aware of. Training on tankers has always been very evolved. Now, some of the crew that are now going to deal with LNG have not had that high level of training that the tanker crew has had over the years. So that is why training is a very important aspect for LNG. Next slide, please. Next. So as I told you, Coast Guard's got a lot of resources. They've got bunkering recommendations for U.S. and foreign flag vessels. This field notice originally was only for U.S. flag vessels, but they changed one of this notices actually included foreign flag vessels. Next. This is also another important aspect. It's also requirements that Crowley will have the operation, emergency, and maintenance manuals. It's a requirement too. So that manual will list contingencies, it lists designs, it lists risk factors that have been mitigated, etc., etc. Each vessel is required to carry it, and each terminal is required to carry it. Next. So that's a job aid the Coast Guard has given. In my opinion, it is sufficient, but rudimentary in some senses. In some sense, there are a lot more evolved, and so there are 3 aspects to a checklist when it comes to bunkering. Typically in all kinds of bunkerings, but more so in the LNG. So it's pre-bunkering. You match up vessels, you see the vessels are compatible, actually the product, each other's systems, etc. So that's pre. During, it's very important. Are you going to use vapor return systems? You're not going to use vapor return systems, etc., etc. So there is a lot that during it. Earthing, what kind of ESD being emergency, the safety device the shutdown device, emergency shutdown devices that to be used. There are 2 schools of thought on ESD. whether to use it or not. But in some places, some parts of the world, the ESD, emergency stopping device, is always used. In some parts, it's not. So that is the other aspect. Purging and draining of the hoses, another important aspect, which is where most of the spills take place, even on the oil from the oil perspective, is during purging and draining. You've got to purge the entire system and drain it out, keep it dry. Next. There's something called SIMOPS, simultaneous operations. The concept of simultaneous operations came actually from an LNG incident, go back many, many years. So the Coast Guard accepts simultaneous operations. In other words, the ship may be bunkering or the vessel may be bunkering and at the same time conducting cargo operations. So there are two operations. So these risks have to be analyzed for SIMOPS, and there should be a SIMOPS document developed if you're going to do it. Typically, up to now, the Coast Guard does not say that you're required to submit it to the Coast Guard, but quite often you may be asked to submit the SIMOPS document. Next. So the risk areas have to be identified in SIMOPS, obviously closer to the bunkering operation, very high, and then medium and low. And this diagram does not really convey these distances can be substantial. Next. Okay, it's there in the IGF code, which has been adopted, came into January 1st, 2017. So now training has evolved. Next. Next, we've talked about this. Next. So LNG firefighting, there already exist basic firefighting courses and advanced firefighting courses, and they have been adapted for the LNG. Jim touched upon it. They've been through these courses. Next. Next, please. Next. This is the essential part of trainings. Next. Next. So periodically, when you look at things from a perspective which you're not involved in that incident, you begin to realize the picture is not always right. This slide is actually to enhance or to make people appreciate that when you're involved in something, you may not be able to see what the problem is. So you've got to have sometimes a third party looking in to see what the problem is. This is just highlighting that part. Next. So just to give you a little statistics on the safety of LNG ships, and this data is from 2015. There have been more than 135,000 voyages completed since the inception of LNG transportation in 1959. There have only been 8 significant incidents involving LNG ships. None resulted in spills from cargo tank ruptures. So it just tells you that the design features of these vessels are very robust. The membrane tanks are skin thin, but they are designed to expand, and some of them have got balsa wood as insulation around it, as an example. But they are using material. It's a very important aspect of LNG vessel construction, that the materials used and steel used and equipment, the machinery used is of very robust nature, and that's one of the reasons you've not had a cargo rupture spill from LNGs. It's a very good legacy that the LNG transport industry has. Next. That's my slides. I'm sorry, I've got to settle down, bad throat like a frog sitting in my neck. But I try to go through this as quickly as possible. Thanks for the opportunity, Dan.
Thanks, Kuldeep. I'm going to circle back to Rami. Are you still with us, Rami?
Yes, I am.
You're talking about water. Is what you're talking about the heat difference between the water and the LNG and increased vapor production, or is there something about the chemical composition, H2 of water and LNG that is an issue, or both?
No, it's pretty similar to bring in a negative 260 degree and you bring in a warmer water or ambient temperature water and pouring it in it, what you're casing is you basically casing the LNG to boil faster, which essentially will end up vaporizing at a much higher rate. So the best approach, if you have or for us at least, if we have a smaller leak on the LNG, is eliminate that leak and let it vaporize itself, right? The bottle that we have, or whatever it is, if we have a bottle. But adding water to it, you creating that larger cloud of vapor to come up, which gonna essentially be, if it's a larger leak, it's gonna be a more difficult leak to control, or a fire to control. You feed in the fire. What are you doing?
You're adding heat and increasing vaporization.
Correct. So the best way to approach it is with the right, fire system, which is a purple K extinguishers, foam, or whatever it is, but definitely not water.
Right. I think now is a great time to open this up to the rest of the participants and let people ask their own questions. Feel free to raise your hand, and I'll call on you when you go to ask a question. If you could turn your camera on. Does anybody want to join the conversation?
So Dan, there is a question in the chat from Ernie Ramos, who's based in Seattle, Washington.
Ernie,
Yeah,
I see you. Jump right in.
Yeah, I'll just read out what I put in there. I'm just curious about airspace considerations, and if there was a spill event, we have all this flammable vapor rising up. Ideally, that's more vertical, but we're going to have news media in the area, people flying drones in the area. That's kind of what normally happens in an oil spill. Do we have to close airspace in X amount of radius from a spill event?
So maybe I'll let Kuldeep answer, but from my experience, based on codes, at least, the classification for the NFPA basically saying class 1, class 2, div 1, div 2, it's 5 feet for class 1, div 1, 15 feet for class 1, div 2, and anything above that rate, it's non-classified. So it's not recommended. Should we say people are going to do it? Yes. The risk of it's going to be less within a certain distance.
So there are two parts. There are two answers. There are two parts to the answer. One is what Rami has given you. Many, many years ago, several decades ago, in fact, we were doing an area exercise here in the Houston area where high H2S Maya crude was being carried on the American Eagle tanker vessel, and styrene was being carried on a Joe tanker vessel. It was an OPA 90 exercise. And when the vessels collided, both released in that exercise, both released cargo. We soon realized that oil spill is not the big dog in that picture. The styrene became, because of its toxic hazard in its flammability, etc. So if you were to have an LNG spill, it will definitely catch the attention of the media. In fact, it'll be something new. And thank you for the question. It's a great question. It'll be something new. And since the average person thinks of it like a tank of butane or cooking gas and highly explosive and highly, etc. So the perception would really cause media interest into this type thing. So media management is an important part of response. And, all shipping companies have their media managers for that. If the media is managed well, it's a boon for the responders, and Jim will agree with me here, because it takes the heat off the responders, and responders can then concentrate on their response as best as they can. So there are two aspects. One is the reality. So in reality, if it was released, are you going to secure airspace above that? It dissipates very, very quickly. And since it dissipates very, very quickly, you may not have a column, of course, depending on the quantum that has been released, you may not have a quantum of airspace above which requires to be secured. And as I told you, the flammable range of LNG is between 5% to 15% by volume. When it gets outside this flammable range on either end, it is not a hazard. It's not a flammable hazard. So in practice, you may impose a no-fly zone over that area for several other reasons, but in reality, it would not be hazardous to, let's say, low-flying choppers or something like that. No.
Yeah, thanks, Kuldeep. I think there are two strategies when we talk about those things that we would look to employ, and we're employing both of those strategies currently in Dutch Harbor, where Jim is. And one is air plume modeling, right? We're gonna bring in the NOAA scientific support coordinator. We're gonna use AUDIOS or some other plume model so that we can demonstrate exactly where this vapor should be going. What altitude would it reach? Which direction would it go? How big an area would it cover? And that allows us to address public safety, and also allows us to communicate effectively with the media, with elected officials, with stakeholders, with the public. And the second is community air monitoring, so that we can demonstrate exactly how much hazard is present. And in Dutch Harbor, currently, we have the Coast Guard strike team up there with air monitors. We have GHD under contract doing air monitoring. The Salvage Marine firefighters on board the vessel are doing air monitoring, and allows you to demonstrate what hazards are actually present. So from a spill management team, an incident management team perspective, rapidly moving to do plume modeling and to do community air monitoring is essential to maintaining public confidence, frankly, and to demonstrating what hazards are or are not present. I mean, we had the ship fire in Tacoma, the Kodiak Enterprise, which was putting off a lot of visible smoke, and getting community air monitoring into the field so that we could address that with the media was really important. And we actually should have done it a little faster than we did. Jim, your thoughts?
Dan, I totally agree with you. I mean, the way we look at responses to it's all time critical, and as soon as we can get that full incident management team process in place, where you covering the safety from the safety perspective, not only on the ship's crew or the barge crew, the salvers, and the public, and then making sure that you're dealing with managing all the stakeholders. There's probably a lot of misunderstanding when it comes to LNG, so that you need to be able to effectively communicate that rapidly to the public on all the things that we're talking about. And then on the tactical side, the operational side, making sure that we have all the information we can get. So I urge everyone that when something happens is to call immediately, to get, they always say prudently over respond. I don't know if you've ever heard that term, but basically push out, you can always demobilize quickly, right? An LNG incident hopefully will be rather relatively short, and all the factors we talked about will come into play that we can resolve it quickly. But with that said, you want to, I think from a corporation to again prudently over respond and make sure you have all those players in place so they can effectively manage it. And Kuldeep mentioned the public affairs side, make sure that that's in place also. I was just, as we were talking, I was thinking Freeport LNG had an explosion at their facility very recently.
Yeah.
And I pulled this out. It says the fire explosion at the Texas Gulf Coast plant, the second largest in the United States, caused global LNG prices to spike. So just the notification of an incident can have kind of strategic impact over an industry. So that goes to, I'll temper that with saying, look, I think one of the best practices is what we're doing right now, is we're getting everybody together ahead of time, and we're working together to do like a risk assessment, gap analysis, and make sure we're ready to tactically respond. So that may be included when we do this, make sure the local fire department city officials and everyone are there, so we're all aligned in advance. Hopefully nothing would ever happen, but we don't exchange business cards in the middle of the night, as they say during an incident.
So
and that
Jim,
PIO part is so critical. And it's not that we as the incident management team want to go out and put out messaging. You know, my regular job, I'm the general manager of the Washington State Maritime Cooperative, and we're the Washington State plan holder for vessels coming in and out of Puget Sound. And, you know, if you're a Crowley, a Polar Tankers, a Sea River, Alaska Tanker Company, and you report a sheen alongside, even if that sheen came from the cream in the coffee that the chief mate threw overboard, you're getting a PIO. And you're getting a PIO so that they can reach out to the state, local, federal officials, round up those other PIOs and stop those other people from putting out messaging that's going to make the situation worse. Or, as I like to say, stop them from doing something stupid. And we've seen this in the past where a nothing burger becomes a national event because some PIO put out a tweet without knowing what's going on, and not thinking that LNG is propane or that it's crude oil, or not knowing what it is. And so having that PIO on your speed dial, having them tuned up to understand what the messaging is and get them in touch with the other players early is critical to success. When I came into oil spill response with MSRC, I thought oil spill response was about cleaning up oil. It wasn't until much, much later that I realized that oil spill responses and other emergencies are actually won and lost in the JIC. They're won and lost in the Joint Information Center. Jim and his team, they're going to do their thing. MSRC, they're going to do their thing. Everybody's going to, tactically, we're prepared to respond. How we message is so critical. You were going to say, Kuldeep?
Yeah, I was saying I call it management of perception and myth. Perception is that entity that can, myths are something easier to actually correct, but perception of anything that's been with somebody for a long period of time is very difficult to dispel. And that comes from, as both Dan and Jim said, good management. A PIO is worth his weight in gold, or her weight in gold, because if they can bust that perception or myth, it really allays the fear of the people and the public and everybody else. So that's an important aspect of response, there's no doubt about it, but that's a reality too.
A huge part of what's going on in the response in Dutch Harbor right now is being managed by the liaison officer. Huge daily stakeholder briefings to keep the public, elected officials informed. And without that proactive approach, situation would be much, much worse. So that it's just so critical. We often find ourselves thinking about tactics, but public messaging is just so important. I can't talk about it enough. Are there any other questions from our participants? Any other comments?
So I did put one in the Q&A. Nobody else has done that yet. So if you do have a question, go ahead and put it. And some of you know I am on the lovely banks of the St. Johns River here in Jacksonville, Florida today, looking out at the train bridge with multiple Crowley containers on the train stuck in the middle of the bridge. So local sailors are not happy because the bridge is down. But what I don't see on the train is any ISO LNG containers, cylinders. I've never seen an ISO cylinder on a train. I see it on the trucks. I see it on the ships. This is more for Rami or Chris. Can you talk about those ISO containers that we ship, that we move, the complexity of the actual unit, and what in the heck is a bomb cart? Because I've heard that phrase and I don't like that. So if one of you wants to grab that, feel free.
Well, I could take the bomb cart. That's typically the It's a trailer that is used in the terminals. It's designed to fit multiple size containers. So you don't. So when you remove the container from the vessel and you set it onto the waiting truck and trailer, it's usually set inside of a bomb car, which is then shifted to a stacking location. So that's what that is. As far as the ISO containers, I'm going to have to. I'm only responsible for shipping them as cargo from Jacksonville to Puerto Rico from time to time. So Rami's going to have to take the ISO container question.
Yeah, for ISO containers on a train, we don't have any operation that require transportation for a train. I know up to 2020, we were not allowed to transport in a train for DOT requirements. I believe that changed, but again, we have not been digging into it because it's not a part of our logistics, right? Our logistic is road transportation from the liquefaction, which is right by the Dames Point Bridge or by Maxville into the port. We'll hand it over to Chris and we'll pick it up in Puerto Rico for the customer delivery.
Thanks. Mark, are there any other questions in the queue?
Yeah, just getting back to the actual cylinder itself. It's not like a typical gas cylinder. There's a lot more to it. There's a lot more not moving parts necessarily, but structural parts that are at risk when it's being hoisted and landed on these various platforms onto the deck of the vessel or onto another container. What do you see as the bigger risk is when it's being landed, I guess, is the question.
Actually,
so on the Conroe vessels, we have had incidents of damage to ISO containers, minor damage. Most of the times it's superficial, but then we do report it. And I do recall years ago we did have an incident with a venting ISO container. Typically it was picked up by the crew. Then we begin our internal notifications, getting in those subject matter experts, as far as what the issue is, and then providing the crew with guidance. And I think if I recall from that incident, it was let's just wait, let's just allow it to bleed off pressure, because we had confirmed it was an empty ISO container, probably just contained a little bit of pressure in there, and it was venting, it was relieving, and that's what we did, is we allowed it to vent and relieve. There was no risk to the vessel or any of the other cargo.
So, Mark, just to add to what Chris said, the ISO containers for LNG that are carrying liquefied, and I'm talking about the cryogenic containers, are very robustly constructed. They've got an external structure, external skin, and then an internal skin, basically for insulation. But it adds to the safety of the container. Having said that, as Chris said, if there's a damage, it's got to be investigated. Even structural condition tests of that damage may require to be done. But it's relatively robust in construction, though.
Yeah, so damage is on an ISO container from the outside, right? Let's say there's a hole, that does not mean liquid coming out, right? You got about a good 10 inches of space that you lose vacuum, your LNG start warming up, your pressure relief start venting. You got some period to transfer that liquid into a different tank or take it to a safe place, but we're talking about a period of a couple of hours here. I mean, it's not going to be instant.
Does anybody else online have a question for the panel? If not, we're going to kind of roll into some closing comments and see if the panelists have anything left that they'd like to say. Starting with Chris.
Yeah, thank you, Dan. So on the ship side, the way that we approach safety with the LNG is it's really focused on containment. And the vessels were engineered to contain. So when we do drills with the crew, all the crew are are trained with either basic or advanced low flash point fuel training, including the cook and the chief steward, because we don't know when they might be involved in a LNG type emergency response. But the design, when they were designing the vessels, according to class and to Coast Guard, a lot of the focus was on containment. And as long as we kept the LNG contained, it doesn't get angry. It doesn't get out of control. So between the structure of the vessel, where our fuel tanks or storage tanks are located, our dedicated LNG processing spaces, they're all self-contained. They're protected with ventilation. They're EX spaces, so all the equipment in there is suitable for a hazardous environment. And then when the gas finally is processed, leaves those spaces to be delivered to the equipment, it's located inside double-walled piping with leak detection systems and safety systems. So if there ever is an incident on board, a detection of a leak, our LNG system will go into a safety mode. It'll purge all of the piping that's located outside of the storage spaces. It'll shut automatic valves, and it will contain that LNG to where it needs to be. It's when that LNG, unfortunately, begins to migrate to places where it shouldn't be, that's when you start getting into more hazardous situations.
Thank you. Rami?
Yeah, from our perspective, I think we take the right measurement. When with the ISO tanks and the safety concerns, that's when we do pre-trip inspection, verification for the equipment. We even discuss and estimate the routes for the drivers, what places they can go, what a risky highway, where they can avoid stopping or turning. That's one of the portion from the logistic perspective. But in the second portion, where we actually start the infrastructure for the storage facility for the customer, one of the big places we find is, how close are we to the neighbors? How close are we to, confined spaces or flammable areas? And we do the wind mitigation. We do the study for the whole facility. Along that, we also start, or along with the process of the design and engineering, we get the fire department for that local town. This is what you're going to see. This is what we expect to do. This is what, this is how, what are the steps that you follow in case of an emergency. This is not propane, this is LNG. So I think with the way approach that we're doing and the safety team that we have at Crowley, we pretty much covering all the risk aspect and addressing it right before it happened.
Thank you, Rami. Jim?
Yeah, just thanks again for the opportunity to join you today. A few points, Rami talked about this, is working with the local fire department, and I know we will all work together to prepare for something to happen. So we make sure that we have a good gap analysis. If there's any gaps, we can address those up front before an incident happens. Key point: if something would happen from a response perspective, I always tell people response is time critical. Things often don't get better with time. So just get that team there that is trained and experienced to handle those types of incidents. And as Dan and Kuldeep talked about, that doesn't just include the operations side, but also the stakeholders like a liaison officer and a public information officer. So you're kind of pushing out at all fronts to get to do the best response you possibly can. And finally, I read a book one time that said the chief cause of every incident is hubris and complacency. So I see that a lot. So I encourage everybody, great safety record, great throughout the industry and with Crowley, but don't become complacent. And I think this discussion is part of that, not becoming complacent and just talking through the issues. So thank you again.
Thank you, Jim. Kuldeep?
Hey, thanks, Dan. And I'd like to thank the entire audience for giving us, or giving me at least, the liberty to go through some very boring slides that you saw today. Having said that, I've been long enough in the industry to know we started with the introduction of, in my time alone, introduction of inert gas on vessels, and we had crude oil washing on vessels. We had new types of cargoes, products, chemical products that came into being. The transportation industry or the maritime industry is an ever-evolving industry. It's going to change even further. And just to continue what Jim said, complacency is actually one of the root causes of these problems. Now, when we get more and more familiar with LNG and LPG as fuels, etc., we are going to be holding it in a little level of contempt. And that is what we should be avoiding. And forums such as this are very important to avoid that happening. And just in one last sentence is, it's only going to grow as a fuel till about the mid 2030s to even 2040s. LNG as a fuel is only going to grow. Of course, it's not the final solution to the greenhouse gases and carbon emissions. That is why it'll phase off a lot quicker than liquid fossil fuel did over a period of time. But then we'll have another challenge. Thankfully, I'll not be around at that given time, but there'll be another challenge at that time. So once again, thanks for your time and thanks for the patient hearing. Thank you.
Thanks, Kuldeep. I always appreciate being able to call you, and I think you've got every regulation memorized. How you do that? You must drive your wife crazy. Do you sit home reading CFRs at night?
So it's like this. There was a ship captain that never did anything wrong. Okay, never. Maneuvering was fantastic. Everything was great. And the junior officers were in awe of this person, like he's the god, never makes a mistake. But before taking a major maneuvering decision of port 20, how to starboard, whatever else he did, he used to quickly run down to his cabin and come running back up breathless. And at one time, the junior officer followed him down. When he went away, he went to see. He saw he opened a drawer. He looked in the drawer and ran back up. In that drawer, it was written, port is to left, starboard is to right. The point being is, there are two ways of getting our knowledge. Either you store it in here, which is never possible. The other is having good colleagues and friends that I have. So we've got a great team at GMS that is full of knowledge.
Thank you. Let's bring it back to Mark. Mark, come back with us.
I'm back. I'm going to share my screen for one good getaway, and that is a gigantic thank you to this panel. Again, I definitely bullied some of you to do this, and I appreciate you not hating me forever. But thank you very much for taking the time out today. Thank you to the audience. This is a very large group. There's over 35 people. There were 40 at the beginning. But again, this is being recorded for those that weren't able to attend. And gigantic thank you to Captain Smiley for stepping in and being able to host this so that everybody doesn't have to listen to my voice. And again, if you haven't heard it before, the Tactics Meeting is a great podcast that gives you a little bit more insight into the emergency management realm. Covers all sorts of topics. And then last year and again this year, we will be working on something called the Tactics Conference, not just the Tactics Meeting, but a whole series of panels. Some were involved. Jim Elliott, you were involved last year. It's just a fun day of getting to get into the conversations that we don't normally see and we don't normally talk about. So check out the Tactics Meeting podcast, and thank you, everyone, for joining us today. And I do have some send-off music, if that's okay.
Thank you.
Okay, so Jim, plan on talking about battery firefighting at the Tactics Conference in August. I mean, that seems like the thing. And for those of you who want to hear Jim more, he was on the Tactics Conference where he walked us through Area Command, which was a great episode. So go out to the Tactics Conference our Tactics Meeting podcast and listen to Jim explain the Area Command, and it'll be great. Mark, take it away with the ending music.
All right, everybody, have a wonderful day. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks,
See
everyone.
you next time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Let me read, let me be.